And what I'm going to do now is share my screen and go to the Hong Kong page and show you what's happened. So I'm going to the empowerment rights page of Hong Kong, and I'm going to scroll down to the time series charts. So you can see that there's been a really significant drop. It's about 1.4 points in all three of the empowerment rights scores for Hong Kong. The only country in our data set of 39 countries where we saw a larger drop across the board in the empowerment rights was in Malaysia. So I'm just going to jump over quickly to show you that by way of comparison. So these are the same charts for Malaysia. And you can see that the drops here were even larger than for Hong Kong. Now, if you want to know more information about why Malaysia's empowerment scores are so low, all you need to do, or why they've dropped so much, is continue scrolling down to this people at risk section. And what we're looking at here is the right to assembly and association. And underneath the word clouds, you can see a long list of information given to us by our expert respondents for Malaysia for each right. So for example, what you can see here is that survey respondents from Malaysia told us that COVID-19 restrictions outlawed most assembly and association under the guise of public health. So it's suggesting that the restrictions went far beyond what was justified from a public health perspective. You can see that journalists were particularly at risk, especially those criticising the governments. You can see that activists, particularly those who focus on human rights issues, human rights abuses by police, environmental issues, or women's rights, all had these rights curtailed. Now, going back to Hong Kong again, you can see although the drops we saw in these three rights for Hong Kong were slightly smaller than for Malaysia, they were starting from an already lower starting point, and they're now getting pretty close to rock bottom. I think the only country in our data set with lower scores on the empowerment rights is Saudi Arabia. Again, if you want to know more information about why Hong Kong's scores on empowerment rights are so low, you can scroll down here again. I'm going to switch to the right to opinion and expression. And here we can see what our survey respondents for Hong Kong said about the right to, about which groups of people had their rights to opinion and expression particularly curtailed. You can see comments such as this one: businesses and restaurants that supported pro-democracy movements were subject to a disproportionate number of investigations by the state using COVID-19 restrictions as justification. You can see teachers who did not teach according to government guidelines. Media and journalists, especially those with pro-democracy angles. You can see this last comment here, that the new national security laws put everyone who criticises the government as anti-government, anti-China or pro-democracy at risk. Now, I just want to take a moment to reflect on the gravity of this information, which is all very powerful, and to think about this picture of what it means in practice for a country that has a 2.8 out of 10 score on the right to opinion and expression. I know that freedom of opinion and expression is something that I take for granted every single day, and people in Hong Kong used to be able to take this for granted also. Now, for those of you who chose safety from the state as the set of rights that you thought might have been more heavily affected last year, let's quickly turn to that and have a look. So there's 5 safety from the state rights, and what you can see here is that none of them showed particularly significant drops between 2019 and 2020. Hong Kong actually has a very good score on freedom from the death penalty. They don't have the death penalty, and not too bad scores on right to freedom from disappearance and freedom from extrajudicial execution. However, where Hong Kong did score particularly poorly is on right to freedom from torture and ill treatment, and also right to freedom from arbitrary arrest. And some of you may have been following some of the events in Hong Kong so far this year. So, for example, some of you may have been following the case of Apple Daily, which is a pro-democracy newspaper in Hong Kong whose owner, Jimmy Lai, was jailed last year. And just last Thursday, Apple Daily's offices were raided by 500 police officers in Hong Kong. The newspaper was continuing to operate. They arrested 5 senior executives and have frozen their bank accounts. So that's the sort of thing that will influence these scores' right to freedom from arbitrary arrest. So on that very sober note, Talia, I'm going to pass the virtual mic back to you again.
Yeah, and we see just in the last 24 hours that Apple Daily, the last pro-democracy newspaper in Hong Kong, has actually closed. So these are very real world effects that are going to continue and that we will continue to measure over the coming 12 months of our survey reporting cycle. Anne-Marie, I'm going to hand back to you very quickly because we're going to go now to our fourth poll question, and you're going to have the answer for it. So the fourth poll question is about the 5 countries in East Asia. So if we have 5 countries that we have in our survey, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Malaysia, South Korea, and Vietnam. Taiwan did really well in its first year in the survey, but can you guess of the 8 rights we measure, 8 civil and political rights, how many of those 8 Taiwan came right at the top? All 8, 6, 5, or 3? So make your guess, and Anne-Marie, you can show us a little bit more of how Taiwan is doing in the context of the region. I'll be interested to see what people are going to guess.
Yeah, me too. So just while we're waiting for the answers to pop up, I'm going to share my screen again. And this, oh, here we have the responses. So actually a lot of people got the correct answer. The correct answer is 5 out of 8. Taiwan topped the East Asia charts on the exact 5 rights where Hong Kong did most particularly badly. So that's the 3 empowerment rights, the right to freedom from arbitrary arrest and the right to freedom from torture. So what I'm going to do is show you that by going to the rights menu and selecting empowerment. And then I'm going to add a country filter for East Asia. And so that narrows down the list of countries to the 5 countries in East Asia where we ran our expert survey this year. And you can see that Taiwan is out ahead of the other 4. And if we look at each of the 3 rights separately, you can see on the right to assembly and association, Taiwan is very far out ahead. On the right to opinion and expression, it's a little bit ahead of South Korea. And on the third one, on the right to participate in government, we wouldn't be able to say with 100% certainty that Taiwan is outperforming South Korea here because the uncertainty bands of the 2 countries are overlapping. But certainly across the 3 empowerment rights as a whole, Taiwan is doing very well. Now, if we switch instead to compare for the same group of 5 East Asian countries on safety from the state, here you can see that Taiwan is sitting second out of the 5 on this table. However, because there's very significant overlap of the uncertainty bands for South Korea and Taiwan, we wouldn't really want to say that one is clearly outperforming the other. However, we can say something about, which particular right is really, which of these safety from the state rights, which one is really pulling down Taiwan's performance the most? And the answer is it's freedom, right to freedom from the death penalty. And if we switch to that one, we can see that of these 5 countries, Taiwan and Vietnam are the only 2 that have the death penalty. Taiwan is not using the death penalty nearly as much as Vietnam, but still we know that the death penalty has been a topic of debate in Taiwan in recent years. And we hope that these data may help to spur a healthy rivalry between Taiwan and South Korea and other, relatively well-performing countries to see who can treat their people the best. If Taiwan were to abolish the death penalty, that would certainly help their scores a lot.
That's a great point. I'm really looking forward to seeing, some improvements if there are movements towards that. Cece's also put a link in the chat box. This is a good point, a good time to remind everybody that our rights tracker is available in 5 languages, including Chinese.